Willkommen to day four of Hammerween. We're going to be talking about 1964's The Gorgon. Well, as you can see behind me, there's the most famous Gorgon of them all, Medusa. One of the Gorgons was not called Megira, but the one in this is called Megira. Megira was the name of one of the Furies, so they conflate Gorgons and Furies, but don't worry, because they throw in some werewolf stuff as well. Roll with it. So in 1964, Terence Fisher has returned to Hammer to direct this after being unfairly blamed for the relative failure of 1962's Phantom of the Opera. Also returning, three icons of Hammer, Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, and Barbara Shelley, who do most of the heavy lifting here, but none of them are the star of the show. Well, no, Barbara Shelley possibly steals it, but the kind of main star of the show here is Richard Pascoe, who's the ostensible lead. But you wouldn't know it if you only watched the start of the film. Let's go into it, shall we? Plot. And please bear with me if this makes even less sense than usual, because the film does too. Young couple. I'll just throw it out there. The girl gets turned to stone whilst pregnant, and the young man kills himself out of grief. There you go. Nice cheery opening. The father refuses to believe the official word coming from town, which is that the young man murdered his girlfriend and then committed suicide. He says, "Oh, my boy would never do that." So he goes to investigate. He gets turned to stone as well, about 5 minutes after he turns into town. Whew. So it's exit, enter stage left, exit stage right, get turned to stone in the middle. Our cast of characters isn't terribly large, apart from uh, our main stars that I've already mentioned. We have Peter Cushing as the local town doctor slash surgeon slash coroner. We have Christopher Lee as a Professor Meister from far away, somewhere else in Germany. And we have Barbara Shelley as Peter Cushing's assistant, right, who is an amnesiac who came to town 5 years ago with no past to speak of. And again, Richard Pascoe plays our kind of main character here. So his part is, remember the young man that killed himself and then the old man that got turned to stone? Well, that was his brother and his father. So he's come to town to find out what happened at the start of the film to decipher the plot. Bless him. He's got a good heart, but trying to decipher this plot, young man. So when Richard Pascoe does so, he has a pretty instant encounter with the Gorgon himself, but luckily he only sees the reflection of it in a pool. So it ages him a little bit, but it doesn't turn him into stone, as it has his would-be sister-in-law and father. But there's already been established in the film a very clandestine operation going on around this town where the authorities, led by Police Inspector Patrick Troughton, God bless him, second doctor himself, and Peter Cushing's more medical side, so the police and the medical sides are in on it. They know something's afoot because every full moon, or near, I think they say 7 out of the last 5 times in the last 7 full moons, something like that. Someone has turned to stone because of a Gorgon. So they know something's happening here, and they're covering it up and framing people for murder and whatnot. Right? So wrongings, right? They're letting people take the fall, potentially go to the gallows. We don't see that here, but somebody's got to take the blame. So they're underhanded to say the least. Meanwhile, Richard Pascoe is whilst also investigating what's happened to his family, has time to fall in love with Barbara Shelley in about a scene and a half. But she's played by Barbara Shelley, so you kind of believe that you would, I'm sure. So the plot just gets weirder every sentence. She kind of continue in this film. It's one of those. Oof, he's not getting terribly far in his investigation, so here comes Christopher Lee for an extended cameo, who comes into town looking like Geppetto from Pinocchio. Big bushy hair, mustache, looks just like Geppetto. And he says, I'll join in the investigation. But by the way, we know the Gorgon's taking on human form, and it's a woman, and there's only one woman in this film, really, so it's probably your new girlfriend. I'm just putting that out there. And Richard Pascoe says, I doubt it, mate, I doubt it. These aren't exact dialogue quotes. Now, normally at this point, this is where I kind of give you a hint towards the end and then say, to avoid spoilers, stop here. But in this film, again, there's only one female lead. There's another female character, but she dies half an hour in, so it can't be her. So it's no spoiler to really say Barbara Shelley is the Gorgon. And she, just like a kind of werewolf film, doesn't seem to be aware that she's the Gorgon. Because when she sees someone turn to stone, she's horrified, but not horrified out of what have I done? Just horrified out of the actual, oh my God, this is a thing that can happen. It's not just mythology. So it's not a surprise to say Barbara Shelley herself is the Gorgon. How it all resolves, I won't go any further into, right? But believe me, I'm not spoiling anything. A 5-year-old would figure out that Barbara Shelley's the Gorgon. We've got two Sherlock Holmes in this film. We've got Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, and we don't need one Sherlock Holmes to tell us who the Gorgon is here. So that's the kind of plot, right? And of course, the Gorgon stopped, but it's got a very bleak ending for a even for a Hammer film. There's a lot of death even towards the end of this film. There's only I won't say who, but there's only one survivor in this whole film of all the main cast, all of them. There's only one survivor. Pretty bleak stuff. Right, the actual review itself, good and bad. I've kind of touched on some of the bad already. The bad is that they don't seem to have any real sense of mystery. And there's a real reason for that, I think. Jimmy Sangster is not the writer for this. It's John Gayling, with also some of the Hammer crew, the producer Nelson Keys, Anthony Nelson Keys, doing an uncredited co-write as well, under the John Elder pseudonym. So for a change, with one of these Gothics for the first time, really, Terence Fisher's not writing, and it shows because I'm convinced Terence Fisher would either have set it up as much more of a mystery and given as much more of a, well, who could it be then? Who could the Gorgon be? Or Terence Fisher would have set up, it's not actually a mystery, but it's more a voyage watching her discover who she is and coming to terms with her true self because we know who Dracula is. We know who Frankenstein and his monster are. We don't need mysteries in those departments. So I'm sure Jimmy Sangster would have come up with just a better form and a better shape to give the film what it needs because it's setting up again a mystery where there's no curiosity involved, which is a bit of a problem, unfortunately. The good though, it's a gorgeous looking film. I mean, you'll spot a few sets that from Revenge of Frankenstein and things, but that's great because as Hammer lovers, we love seeing, hey, that's the back of Bray Studios, or that's the pond just down the road. We know all these locations. That's always great stuff to explore. The performances are universally wonderful. You can tell Christopher Lee's having a ball playing a good guy, but a kind of gruff professor type. It's not a million miles away from his Horror Express type, or even a bit of City of the Dead. Not a million miles away, but he's having a ball playing it, you can tell. Peter Cushing is obviously great, but it's not challenging him at all. He's basically playing Frankenstein. There's a real sense that, I mean, there's a scene in here where, for no real reason, he does a brain operation on a character who comes to nothing. And there's a sense that they've put that in so they could maybe have it in the trailers. and have lobby cards of him looking like Frankenstein and kind of get that crowd into who might not like Greek mythology, but hey, come along, Frankenstein's here. There's a bit of a sense of that. Barbara Shelley's fantastic. Although she hasn't given enough material to have an arc as Carla slash the Gorgon, she plays what she has perfectly, and she is, I think, adding more than the script has given her. I think she's bringing out more than the script is putting into her character in a wonderful Barbara Shelley-like way that she often did. Patrick Troughton gives a wonderful little supporting role as the police lieutenant and charge of things in town. I mean, it's an odd one, this, because it has all the elements that you will love in a Hammer Gothic, but because unlike the other Gothics, really, it sets up a mystery and there's no mystery to be resolved. You have to kind of mark it down for that. I mean, I don't do scores, but subconsciously. But then the film's got such a bleak, dark ending that I kind of love that for its on its own terms too. And Richard, I keep forgetting his name, Richard Pascoe, Dale and Pascoe there. He's great. A lot of the juvenile leads for Hammer could be very bland, um, usually called Carl or Paul if you're watching one of the Draculas or Frankensteins. But Richard Pascoe is a proper Shakespearean actor, and it shows he's again bringing a lot more to the character than I think is there on the page. The set design's fantastic. Probably the star of the show here is, apart from Barbara Shelley, is James Bernard, whose scores for Hammer were legendary and iconic for those early films. But here especially, he really sets the scene more than just about any of his productions. I think he's completely necessary. Otherwise, this film would really fall to bits. He's got a wonderful ethereal theme for the Gorgon when she's on screen. The Gorgon's design itself is a bit janky, but I don't care. I never criticize Hammer for design stuff. It's like Doctor Who. I don't care. It's part of the charm for me. And not in a patronizing way, like, oh, isn't that so bad? It's good. No, I genuinely like it. I can see past it. It's the stuff I grew up watching on BBC Two at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at the weekends. So yeah, I mean, the Gorgon's highly recommended, highly, highly recommended, but only after you've seen better Gothics from them. So see The Curse of Frankenstein and The Revenge of Frankenstein. See Dracula. See Hound of the Baskervilles, which I've reviewed previously on the channel. And then see this, because it's got all the same people involved apart from Jimmy Sangster. So, in fact, it's almost an interesting little experiment to say to yourself, what's the missing element here? Jimmy Sangster in the writing, and see if you can spot it too. If you didn't know before, now that you know that that's the one element that's kind of changed from all those stone cold classics. Stone cold, pardon the pun, given we're talking about people turning to rocks here. But what we do get is still tremendously fun. It's only an hour and 23 minutes or so, so there's not enough time for you to really get frustrated or annoyed, even if you're not enjoying it. So I'd give it a go anyway. I think it's do you know the kid in class who the teacher would get frustrated with? More than the naughty kid, the teacher would get frustrated with the kid who had potential to be great and they weren't quite hitting it. That's what the Gorgon is. That's what the Gorgon is. It's got the potential to be Frankenstein, to be Dracula, and it's just not hitting that potential, unfortunately. Just not hitting it. But it's not far away, and you can see all the potential in it. So, in a way, it's almost just as interesting to see a film like this, to see Hammer not quite making it, because in seeing what doesn't quite make it, that tells you what does make it by default. So, well, there we go then. Another one bites the dust. 1964's The Gorgon. Tomorrow, you've been good boys and girls, although we're going to try and avoid Frankenstein and Dracula films in this series. I think you do deserve a bit of something like that. So tomorrow, I think we'll give you some vampire stuff, eh? Who knows? Who knows? Folks, see you tomorrow. And if you've seen the Gorgon, let me know what you think. If you haven't, again, check it out. It's interesting. May not be great, but it's interesting. And sometimes that's just as good. Till tomorrow, folks.